Well, hey there and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to look at the period known as Colonial America. So if your name is John Hancock or Samuel Adams or Patrick Henry or maybe Thomas Jefferson, then this is the video for you. Let's get to it. Okay, so let's begin with the big picture here. Colonial America refers to the time when various European powers, mainly England, established colonies on the land we now call the United States. And it starts with the first permanent English settlement in 1607 and ends with the American colonies declaring independence from Britain in 1776. So first off, let's talk about how and why these colonies came into existence. So the first permanent English settlement was Jamestown in 1607, and it was established by a group of investors who were looking to make money. And to be fair, they did. They found a lot of gold. Okay, not really. But they did find tobacco, and that turned out to be a very profitable crop. Now after that, we had Plymouth in 1620, which was founded by the Pilgrims who were seeking religious freedom from the Church of England. These guys are the ones who signed the Mayflower Compact, which established the idea that the government's power comes from the people. And then there was the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, which was founded by Puritans who wanted to purify the Church of England. The Puritans, you should know, believed in hard work, and they wanted to create a model society based on their religious beliefs. They wanted to build what they called a city upon a hill. And as far as the other colonial powers go, mostly we're talking about Spain, which held Florida and the Southwest and parts of the West, France, which controlled parts of Canada, and the Mississippi Valley, and the Netherlands, which briefly controlled New Amsterdam, which is now New York. Next up, let's talk about the different types of colonies. So we had royal colonies, which were controlled directly by the king, like Virginia after 1624. Then there were proprietary colonies, which were granted to individuals or families like Pennsylvania. And then there were charter colonies, which were self-governed through a corporate charter like Connecticut. Now as far as the economy of the colonies goes, we have to understand that it varied a lot depending on the region. So in the New England colonies, we had small farms, shipbuilding, trade, fishing, and a strong religious work ethic. In the middle colonies, also known as the breadbasket colonies, they produced a lot of grain, and these colonies were more diverse in terms of people and faiths than the other colonies. And in the southern colonies, we had large plantations growing crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. And these colonies relied heavily on the labor of enslaved Africans. Now as far as labor went, indentured servitude was also a big part of the colonial economy. So indentured servants worked for a set number of years in exchange for passage to America. And slavery, by the way, became institutionalized by the late 1600s, especially in the South. For example, in 1619, the first African slaves arrived in Virginia. Okay, next up, let's talk about government and law on the colonies. So town meetings in New England laid the groundwork for democratic governance. And in 1619, the House of Burgesses, which was the first elected assembly in Virginia, was established, and the various colonial charters also gave settlers a sense of self-rule. But it often clashed with British authority. As far as religion in the colonies, well, the Puritans and Pilgrims, who founded many of the New England colonies, sought religious freedom, but they often enforced strict religious conformity. The Quakers in Pennsylvania, however, promoted religious tolerance and pacifism. And during the 1730s and 40s, the First Great Awakening, a revivalist religious movement swept through the colonies. This movement emphasized personal faith over church doctrine and was led by preachers like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. Okay, now let's talk about the Native Americans. So initially there was cooperation between the colonists and the natives, like the Thanksgiving. But as the colonists expanded westward, tensions grew, and this led to major conflicts like the Pequot War from 1636 to 1638 and King Philip's War from 1675 to 1676. Ultimately, disease, land disputes, and broken treaties devastated native populations and forced them off their lands. All right, let's move on to trade. So the colonies developed a complex trade network known as triangular trade. It involved trading slaves from Africa for sugar and molasses from the Caribbean, and then rum. and textiles from the colonies. And mercantilism was the economic policy that the British used to control the colonial economy. Basically, it required the colonies to supply raw materials to Britain and buy manufactured goods from them. And to enforce this, the British passed a series of laws known as the Navigation Acts, which were often ignored, leading to what historians call salutary neglect. Okay, next up, let's talk about some of the ways that the colonists resisted British control. So Bacon's rebellion in 1676 was an uprising of frontier settlers against Virginia's governor. It revealed tensions between the wealthy elite and the poorer class in the colonies. And then there was the Dominion of New England, which was an unpopular royal consolidation of the New England colonies that was later dissolved. And then we have the Enlightenment, which was a philosophical movement that emphasized reason, liberty, and self-government. Think John Locke, Montesquieu, and others. Anyway, it greatly influenced colonial thinking and sowed the seeds of revolution. Next, let's talk about literature and education in colonial America. So despite the rigid religious and social rules, high literacy rates developed, especially in New England, where reading the Bible was important. And this led to the founding of the first college, Harvard, in 1636, followed by Yale in 1701. And then there were political pamphlets and sermons that shaped public opinion on issues like taxation and representation. And lastly, Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac reflected the Enlightenment ideals of thrift, hard work, and self-reliance. All right, now let's bring it home. So between 1763 and 1776, tensions between Britain and the colonies grew, and this was due to Britain's desire to tighten its control over the colonies after the costly French and Indian War. So in 1763, Britain passed the Proclamation of 1763, which banned settlement west of the Appalachians, which angered the colonists who wanted to expand their land. And then there were a series of acts passed, like the Stamp Act in 1765, the Townshend Acts in 1767, and the Tea Act in 1773, which all placed new taxes on the colonies. And each time the colonists resisted through protests, boycotts, and even the Boston Tea Party in 1773. And then there were the Intolerable Acts passed in 1774, which were designed to punish Massachusetts for the Tea Party. And this just escalated tensions. And finally, in 1774, the First Continental Congress was held in Philadelphia, where colonial leaders from 12 colonies met to coordinate their resistance. And then in 1775, fighting broke out between British troops and colonial militias at Lexington and Concord, marking the beginning of the Revolutionary War. And 2 years later, on July 4, 1776, the 13 colonies officially declared their independence from Britain. And this was based on the ideas of the Enlightenment and the belief in natural rights. Okay, that's what you need to know about colonial America. And hey, if you want me to keep making these videos, then by all means subscribe. And alright, I'll catch you on the flip-flop, signing out.